In reading one of my favorite adolescent books yesterday, The Chrysalids, I got a bit of a new perspective on some of the ideas that were presented there, I think. Perhaps worth sharing. And it's particularly in relationship to the notion of mutagens, being mutated. If you haven't read the book, I'll give a brief breakdown. Lots will be left out, but it's a post-nuclear fallout world where you get a small little scope into one community in northern Labrador where instead of being cold 10 months out of the year, it's actually warm 10 months out of the year. This community that you get the inside perspective on is highly fundamentalist. Being the only book that was passed along was the Bible, and then augmented because of the mutations to mean only those beings that are sort of pure should live. That is, not mutated according to their standard. And there's reflections through the uncle Axel about what it means to be human and what it means to be not mutated and such. The little character that you follow along, David, you see him from his younger years up till his adulthood. He has this telepathic power, and he communicates with a few others locally, one of which he falls in love with, Rosalind. She too has this telepathic power. He seems to be the strongest of them because he's had glimpses of this other world where there's flying vehicles and they all seem to communicate telepathically. In this culture, if you're found to be mutated, you will be either killed or tossed to the fringes. The fringes are this, all the mutated people gathered, very brutal, very red meme, and this culture's relatively pathological blue, but it's the one thing that the author doesn't take into account is the fact that in a survivalistic system, there's the requirement to maintain the resources that you have for survival purposes. If someone's badly mutated and you have a finite amount of resources, there is a sense that it's hard to justify in some regards giving or providing those resources to those beings. However sad and however cruel that is, there's a harsh reality that sets in those sorts of cultures. We see this in our own historical world when you look at the Eskimos, where even their grandparents would be put on ice floes and just set off to sea to die. So these are stark realities that one faces when there's not abundance. Our world still has abundance, although we're not using it properly. And therefore there isn't this kind of need to be cruel, although there's many people that still do. Oftentimes these are the people that have superabundance and twist their twisted morality. And anyway, so there's this struggle between what it means to be human. As I said earlier, Axel, David's uncle, sort of characterizes David as potentially more human. If you define the mind as something that is uniquely human, then his mental capacities are more human in that regard. David later on in the book has a younger sister named Petra, her capacities even supersede David's, in that she can actually see another location and communicate with those beings in this other location. She has such a capacity for this telepathic abilities that she can actually command the others that are telepathic in the region to do things. But this actually puts them all in jeopardy. I won't get into all the context there. But just expanding on the notion of being a mutated individual in a society. Although there's not the starkness in our society in this regard, it's still present. There's still a kind of mutagenic, I mean, whether or not you're telepathic or not, there's sort of this reality of being non-ordinary. And all cultures sort of face this. There's generally sort of a standard of being, and if you're above it or below it, you're either pulled up or pushed down. In the context of that society, it's sort of a life or death thing where you'll be murdered, potentially murdered anyways, if you don't fit that standard. In our culture, although I would say that there's big gridworks of power and control, you might be soft-killed, but you probably won't be outright murdered. But our ability to integrate the knowledge that we are faced with is a mutagenic capacity, I'd say. That is, it defies the norms that our standard of culture has laid down up to this point. And so we are carving new boundaries. And in so doing, I would say our physiological structure is changing. If nothing else, our neural pathways have made new connections. Probably more sensitivity to our body, our physiological self. And then there is the actual genetic modification of foodstuff, and that too is playing a role in mutating us, and I'd say largely to our detriment, because the people in charge of Monsanto and the like are not very heartful beings in my view. But there's this sense that you got to kind of come up against that. You got to fight for being the mutagen, if you believe that, in a sense, your abilities, your capacities transcending include that which went before, as David and the others sort of believed. Now, in the end of that book, it takes a bad twist, in my view. The interpretation is a little bit skewed, because Zealand, some people from Zealand, the place where Petra and David sort of had some communication, actually come over and save them, but they murder both sides, both the fringe people and the people from David's culture. And they justify it by saying that they both don't have any direction in life, for the fringe people, no meaning, and then the people in David's community, they say that they are what's the word for it? Suppressing evolution. And this isn't a very embracing view in my opinion. So we gotta probably do better than that, but I'll leave it there. Blessings.